what I wanted to do first is to make sure that we all kind of are on the same page about what AI is. So a little bit about me first. So before I came here, I was in a government.
Hey, Chris, can you kind of get closer to the camera?
Oh yeah.
So we can see you. There we go.
Can you see me?
Yep.
All right. So before joining Backyard Brains, I was at the NIH studying fish. We were looking at the individual neurons in the brain and kind of trying to map how they respond to different sensory stimuli. So that's kind of my context. While I was doing this, I realized that I could probably build one of these, or at least I thought so. And so I started playing around with kind of using generic parts, including Arduinos and so on, to build a little robot that I figured could work a little bit like a real brain. So with spiking neurons and kind of sensory input and motor control. The NIH was not too keen on this, but I met Greg and we carried this forward and thought that we could take this into the classroom. And so what we have today is a robot that has a camera, so it can take video input. It has a microphone, so it can get audio input. It has a distance sensor, and then you can give it some user inputs as well with buttons. And then within the brain, within the app, that information is fed into arbitrary networks of spiking neurons. And you can also use other neural networks of the type we're going to talk about today. And then as the output, that brain can control movement and sound and lights on the robot. So that's kind of my context. That's what I do here. And the thing is that with video and audio especially, you need AI to be able to extract interesting features. So we want the robots to be able to detect, faces, other robots, specific other robots. We want it to be able to detect sounds, including words, and so on. So that's kind of how I'm using AI today. Another thing that we want to use AI for is eventually to generate new brains, so new spiking neurons out of kind of nothing, just using the AI to design new brains using generative networks. So that's the context. So so we're doing this at Backyard Brains, Neurorobotics, and the aims are, one, to just make brain modeling something that you can do in school or at home. Two, to create a community around modeling brains that's kind of supportive and helping, especially, but kind of we're focusing on high school students and helping them get into a STEM career is kind of a long-term goal of ours. And then finally, like I said, to use generative AI to create new brains. And so we have some publications on this that I can share with you later. We have a user guide and we have a GitHub repo where you can download all of our code, and use today. All right. So that's kind of the background, that's the context, that's sort of what I do. And but I'm a neuroscientist, and so I want to take it back to neuroscience for a little bit, just to make a comparison between real brains and the kind of AI networks that we're going to be using in this course. So I like this picture. It kind of gives you the all important information that the brain, the evolution of the nervous system started very early. So we're talking about billions of years ago.
Chris, can I interrupt for a second? Can you present your screen for the online people?
Can I what?
Are you showing slides?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Is that not showing?
No.
Oh my God.
That's all right.
Oh, that's terrible.
Just hit present now.
Yeah. No, sorry. I clicked on present in Google and not in the chat. Sorry.
No worries. I love it that the teachers that are following in, they figured this out back in March, and we're slowly.
Yeah, no. Oh, thank you. All right. It's so warm.
Yeah, it is.
All right. So I'm presenting now. Am I?
Try turn your AC to the max and close all the doors. That's how I survived last summer.
I'll close the door?
Yeah, absolutely. That's how AC works in an enclosed environment.
All right. Okay. All right, so just quickly, I used to study zebrafish. The point is we were studying the actions of individual neurons in the brain. And that's what we're trying to do with these robots at Backyard Brains. And an important point is that you need to use AI to kind of process both the sensory input and also to generate new brains. And we've been doing this for 3 years now. We got a research grant that we're getting renewed at the moment, hopefully. And we have a couple of publications and kind of online material that you can use if you want to get started with this. But what I want to talk about, like right now, is how AI is still different from brains, because I think it's important that we all have a shared understanding of what we mean by AI, by machine learning, neural networks, and so on for this course. So the point of this slide is mainly that you have brains developing about 600 million years ago or 500 million years ago, starting with sponges, eventually getting into vertebrates and lamprey and so on. And eventually you get up to mammals that have the big cortex. As for numbers, I think it's good to have a sense of how many neurons different species have. So a snail sits at about 20,000. It can still learn. It can still move around. It can still forage. It can do all the things it needs using just 20,000 neurons. If we scale up to a bee, we've got 1 million neurons and so on, all the way up to humans with our 86 billion neurons. But there are several species that have bigger brains: whales, dolphins, gorillas even have bigger brains than we do, and elephants. Yep.
I just want to make a quick comment. There's a new word, a word called utily. Does anybody know what that word means?
How do you spell it?
Eutely. It's a biological word that means invariant number of cells. So a C. elegans has what is 902?
Yeah,
or something like that.
Yeah.
So I've actually often asked biologists at what level in brain complexity does the number of neurons start to become variant in between individuals of the species? And I don't know if we know that. But anyways,
so I think at vertebrates you have that. At least the fish that we were studying were different every time, but the snails that I studied in the PhD were the same every time.
Really, the snails had invariant cell number.
In snails, yeah, you could identify individual neurons for sure.
Cool.
Yeah. Right, and so and in evolution you get these conserved, complicated structures like the basal ganglia, which is my kind of focus of research, action selection, motivation, and so on. Incredibly complicated structures that sit inside the brain and kind of feed in circles. They go in big loops, taking information from one part of the brain, processing it, feeding it back to that same part of the brain. In many different ways. The hippocampus does the same thing. Many of the big structures within the brain, including the prefrontal cortex, don't get any sensory information or produce motor output. They just process. And that's going to become important. Okay, so we know what brains are, sort of, and we've been studying them for 100 years, since Cajal, before that as well. We know they are neural networks. We know that So we know that brains are neural networks, and we've been trying to build artificial neural networks for a long time, but it's only around 2010 that this started to take off. Like, this is a recent thing, and the reason for that is multifold. So we have ubiquitous GPUs turning up. So basically, after 2005, 2006, and so on, you could buy, a PlayStation 2 or a gaming computer, or even in some early phones, but especially in the gaming systems and in video editing software, they were developing hardware that used parallel computing rather than single or kind of quad-core, multi-core computing. And the big change with that is that when you do neural network computation, you're doing massive numbers of things in parallel. And so if you have a computer that's able to do processing in parallel, you dramatically speed up how quickly this thing is going to operate and how quickly it's going to learn. And basically trying to run and train especially AI networks, neural networks on a single core that you have in a normal computer is very hard, just because it doesn't have this parallel processing capability. There were also some important developments in theory. So you had back propagation, the theory of how these weights should be changed to kind of effectively learn and train a network. That was developed by Hinton and other people. It's called backpropagation and gradient descent. There's a big argument in kind of theoretical neuroscience at the moment about whether the brain does anything like backpropagation. We know it doesn't do classical backpropagation, but there are theories of how we could implement something like backpropagation using only local computation. Yeah.
Can you explain?
Sure. So the structure of a neural network is something like what you see in the lower right corner here. So you have neurons and you have synapses that connect to neurons in the next layer. That's kind of the typical structure. When the network is untrained in the beginning, it's just going to take the pixels of an image, and they're going to come in at the input layer. In the next layer, when it's untrained, these connections are just going to be random. So each neuron is going to randomly connect to layers at the next, to neurons in the next layer, and then the next layer, and the next layer, and so on. And then when you show an initial image to an untrained network, it's going to produce an output kind of randomly. In this case, it has 4 different choices, so like dog, cat, unknown, and not an image, say. And if it produces the right image, if you show it a picture of a dog and it gives the output dog, you're going to use something called backpropagation and gradient descent to go back and check all of the synapses, check which ones were involved in making the correct decision, and reinforce those synapses. That's backpropagation. We have a measure of how important each synapse was to making the correct decision. Thing is, the brain doesn't do that. The brain doesn't have a possibility to go back synapse by synapse and checking the contribution of each synapse to the output. It doesn't work like that at all. It works with other concepts that we're going to go into, but it's just important to highlight that that's a key difference.
So you said you reinforced the ones that led to the correct answer.
Yes.
Do you de-enforce the ones that did not lead to the correct
I
answer?
don't know. I don't know.
You might. They all have weights.
Yeah.
So you just keep adjusting the weights.
Yeah.
You might end
That's
up with less than
true.
Right. No, probably, yeah. We also had a different theoretical kind of invention called convolutional neural networks that attributed to Jan LeCun that were proved to be very useful for image classification, especially, where in convolutional neural networks, it's able to extract features in a way that kind of mimics the way the visual system does it. So you identify little things like edges and contrasts and colors and like dots and like small primary visual features in the early layers, and then you identify those features and build up objects from those features later in the network. So that was a big change. And then finally, we have ubiquitous labeled data these days, and that again is something that happened with the internet. Was that suddenly we had people who, for various reasons, have like labeled a lot of images. And so, for instance, the neural network that we use for object detection for our robots, it's able to identify about 100 different dog breeds. And that's just because there's been a lot of dog shows where people name the breed of their dog and show a picture of it. And so that's been one, and dogs are kind of characteristically visually distinct. And so it just proved to be a very appropriate thing for networks, early networks to train on. Not just to identify dogs, but also to be able to train the early features, to just learn, okay, how do I distinguish anything from anything else? I need to have these little edges and the little dots and so on at the beginning. And then you can use something called transfer learning, where you take those early layers and apply them to a different problem. And that's been very useful. So these are kind of the reasons why AI is becoming such a powerful, all-pervasive thing right now. We have the hardware, we have the data, and we have the theory that's needed. Just some key AI concepts. So we talked about neurons. We talked about synapses, sometimes called edges. We have the layers of neurons. We have the weights, which are the strengths, basically, of the synapses. We have feed forward and recurrence. This is another kind of shocking thing about AI networks, is that they are almost all of them completely feed forward. There are a few recurrent nets out there. We mentioned LSTM yesterday, long short-term memory, which has one little recurrence from one layer to a previous layer. It's a very small recurrence. And LSTM has now been replaced with transformers that are completely feed-forward. Convolutional neural nets also completely feed-forward. It means that there's no feedback from the later neurons, the neurons that are later in the processing stage, back to the earlier neurons. That doesn't exist.
So in terms of neuroscience, that would be like there's no top-down processing, there's only bottom-up processing.
Yes. So the retina works this way. The retina is completely feed-forward, and there's nothing from within the brain that signals like forward through the to the retina to modulate it. Once you get within the brain, there's an enormous amount of recurrence everywhere. Even within individual brain regions, you have neurons projecting in both directions. So that's very different from how AI networks look. One technical but almost philosophical difference that emerges when you do this is that there is no time in these networks. So if you have recurrence, if you have later layers feeding back to earlier layers, you have to give the system some time to process. You have to like let the information from the later layers kind of percolate in the system a bit to let it settle into a state. So recurrent nets are sometimes called dynamical systems. They can be analyzed with dynamical systems theory because you need to let the system settle in time. But these networks, what constitutes, I'd say like 95% of all AIs today, they don't have time. You show them an image, they produce the output, and that's it. There's no time step, and that can take as long as it takes for the computer to make the inference. There's no actual need to let the system settle in physical time. There are recurrent networks, but they're very hard to kind of make efficient. Yeah.
So you said AI, most AI like neural networks are feed forward, but you can still backpropagate the.
So backpropagation is a different thing. Yeah, it's a different thing. Backpropagation is like a technique that we apply to change the weights. Okay. This would be to actually send the signal itself to earlier layers. All right, and so we mentioned data and we have labels. Almost all of what you're going to be doing once, assuming the AI code itself is working, a lot of it is about selecting the data and being able to label it. And so that includes things like if you want to say a word and then just give it a text version of that word. So you also need to think about, okay, if I say a word and it takes a second, which part of that second is the word and which part is the noise? Like how can I select only the part of the data that's relevant and skip the other parts? If you're using images, this is sometimes easier. They have something called region labeling. So if you have an image with your object in it, if you just highlight that object, you can kind of tell the computer that, okay, everything that's not within that little box that I just made is like other data. So you can use that other.
Did the microphone just mute?
Hey, Chris, your microphone just died.
How about now?
Again.
It's good?
It's okay.
Say again?
Yeah, so you basically sample noise, and then you use that sampled noise to know what to filter out.
Yes, right. Okay, so, and then we have training, which is when you take your data and your labels, and you run, you present your data one by one to your network, and then you use backprop to change the synapses, and you keep doing this until you have a kind of an effective way of distinguishing different objects. And and it's now working kind of shockingly well. We just got access to GTP3, which is able to complete text basically. So you can give it a half-finished novel, and it'll produce an interesting continuation of that text. You can give it your agenda for meeting with the students on Wednesday, and it will kind of produce more things that you should talk about. Good things, like interesting contributions. You can give it, one thing I like to do, so we with the students, they do a student-led exercise where they're supposed to design a brain that can do something using only spiking neurons and synapses. And so coming up with what kind of brains they should design, you can use GTP3 for. So you just say, produce a brain that can recognize faces and greet them. Produce a brain that can, find the exit of the room. Produce it, and so on and so on. And it comes up with these really creative, but sometimes slightly scary things that it thinks brains should, the brain should do. In one case, it said that the brain should move towards a person until its distance sensor is activated and then explode. It gave me that as a proposal, because the system is completely... It's explorative, and you can even set how much it should kind of veer from its initial starting point. But it's highly creative, and it really makes you... It's not quite that it makes you think you're talking to a person. It's just that you want to hear more, as if you're talking to an interesting person who's actually giving you kind of interesting, good information. Anyway, so how do we get to those big systems? So we've talked about brains, talked about AI, and so I want to say just a few words about the spectrum of hardware and learning paradigms that we have. So GTP3 and other kind of really big networks, like the ones that handle your Google search or your Netflix recommendations and so on, they all run on these supercomputers or server farms, up in wherever they sit. There's some in northern Sweden because it's cold, and so that's kind of cloud AI. That's when you have unlimited resources basically to train your networks, and these networks can be very big, like hundreds of thousands or millions of neurons, and 10,000 times as many parameters and kind of synapse strengths. But before that, we have the kind of PC version of AI, which can run on a laptop or an iPhone. And so this is what I was talking about at the beginning, where having gaming-ready hardware turned out to be really important for AI. So if I want to train a network to detect other robots, for instance, which is something I do a lot, I need to use something like at least an NVIDIA card, like a computer with an NVIDIA card, because otherwise training takes forever, and it can't really run in real time. There are GPUs that are more for kind of maker applications. So the Edge GPU, the NVIDIA Jetson here is the one that you see in the picture, and so that one has that's $54, and the NVIDIA Jetson Nano.
Okay.
So that's what you see on the picture here. So that's $54, and it has 128 CUDA cores. So that's about 10 times fewer than in my laptop, but it's still 128 times more than a single core. So it can run AI applications much faster than you could with a single core. And then so finally we have the really, really small systems that have enough memory and enough speed, usually only just a single core or maybe dual core, but they have enough memory and speed to be able to run AI applications, but you wouldn't want to train an AI application on one of those. So we're going to be working with the... That's a TinyML. So we're going to be working with the... Well, it's over there.
How
But
many courses is TinyML?
Stanislav? I believe it's just one core.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, Neuron.
How many cores in the Nano 33?
Just one. Yeah, one.
Yeah, just one.
core,
Just one.
basically. Core is usually a reserved word for a processor. This is not processor. This is microcontroller, but analog to one core on a processor.
What is important about this board? Like, why is this board, only this board equals on TinyML?
So it's not just that board. So we have now several of these microcontrollers. You have the ESP32 is also able to do these things, and there's a few other ones that have just enough memory and processing speed to make it doable. There's another part to it where you have to compress the AI model after you've trained it on a proper GPU. You have to compress it using this TinyML framework into something that can run on a little controller like that.
So the innovation of TinyML is it can run on one core, but can act like it has many neurons.
Yes, yeah. Yes, and so so let me say actually, so we have this kind of spectrum of hardware where it's a little bit about how much parallel computing power you're able to apply to your projects. But what's interesting is that all these different systems run exactly the same AI. They all use backpropagation. They all use something like TensorFlow or PyTorch or one of these kind of big AI frameworks. In the case of TinyML, they use something called TensorFlow Lite, but it's still TensorFlow. It's the same thing, it's just compressed. And the different kinds of learning that you can do with these AIs are the same. So you can do supervised learning where you have labels. So you present data and you present labels, and the system eventually learns to distinguish the data based on labels. So to distinguish new data into its correct labels. You have reinforcement learning, where instead of telling the system what something is, you just tell it whether it did good or did bad, and it will then go back and do backprop and learn to do good. And you have unsupervised learning, where the system is just looking for statistical regularities in the data and kind of finding them and exploring them without labels. And all those those are the AI learning paradigms, and they kind of apply equally to these different AI hardware systems. It's just that the speed at which you can run these AI hardware systems is going to really, really, really vary, to the point that trying to train a big network on a Arduino Nano could take thousands of years. It's not doable, but it's the same kind of system, because we're still talking about cores. We're still talking about von Neumann architecture. We're still talking about zeros and ones essentially. But it doesn't have to be like that. There is a new category of hardware called neuromorphic hardware that I just want you to be aware of. So one thing that's going on with normal CPUs and GPUs is that the rate at which they've become better, which has been steady, this is Moore's law, since the 60s, is coming to an end, a hard end, because the transistors are getting so small that after they go below like 3 or 4 nanometers in size, it becomes impossible to make them any smaller. So far, making them smaller has been a technical challenge. Now it becomes a physics challenge. And so we are hitting a wall in terms of how much better we can make computers. This is partly why you haven't really seen that much kind of advancement in the speed of the clock on your computer, for instance. They've added a few more cores, but it's the same. It's kind of the same processor, because it's getting harder and harder to make them faster. And so one thing that people have played around with is this thing called neuromorphic hardware, where you instantiate hardware neurons in the system that signal to each other asynchronously and with spikes. And so in a normal CPU, in a normal GPU, in a normal AI network, you're still representing every single neuron at every time step and checking whether it's on or off. All of this has to be written to memory, and then you go back and check the next time step and so on. So there's a lot of unnecessary overhead there. What the brain does is much more power efficient. It only signals, a neuron only signals when it signals. If it's not signaling, it's not being registered or recorded or having to kind of be monitored by the computer system. Instead, if it's neuron only signals when it gets inputs, that requires much less power. It's called event-based processing sometimes.
So it's almost like the current paradigm, like in the artificial neural networks, is a system where you have to, for every neuron that the brain is using to compute, you have like a separate, basically like set of processing and memory being used in order to monitor that individual neuron.
Yeah.
So like the brain is doing it with one computing unit as opposed to many monitoring one unit.
Yes. And so, I mean, one way to think about it is, it's let me just tell you what it is. So Intel's Lohoe chip is the kind of, at least the most mature neuromorphic chip that they have today, and it's able to simulate 130,000 spiking neurons that can connect to thousands of other neurons, kind of arbitrarily. And what happens when you do these neuromorphic chips is that you go from, up on the left here, high energy and time requirements, partly because you're checking every neuron at every time step, and partly because in a typical von Neumann architecture, in a typical computer processing unit, you have to ship instructions from memory to the CPU and back all the time, like that. The processing is not happening locally. In a neuron, everything is happening locally. It's getting synaptic inputs and it's signaling, and that's it. There's no monitoring, there's no memory, it's all happening right there on the neuron. So you have
memory is in some sense even the physical property
that's right.
of that neuron.
Yeah. And so that's why in neuromorphic hardware, the energy consumption goes down, but the spatial complexity goes up. So you get a larger chips where the actual physical connections between neurons become important. Whereas in a computer, of course, you can run anything. But it's general purpose computing. So if we use neuromorphic hardware, which is not commercially available today, you can use it as a researcher. If you're a research institution, you can get access to something like the Lohoe chip. But there's nothing like an Arduino for spiking neural networks. But the reason for that is that Intel and these other people who are working on neuromorphic hardware, they don't know yet what we're going to use this hardware for, because all it can do is simulate spiking neurons. And basically, no one's found a way yet to implement typical AI models using spiking neurons in a way that kind of gives you this energy and time boosts. What you can do is you can run a spiking neural network and only look at the rates of firing. So then it becomes so you have spiking neurons, but you kind of abstract away the spikes and you only look at the rates of firing. If you do that, then it's possible to have a spiking neural network that can do what AI networks, typical AI networks can do, but you don't get this energy and time benefit. What we need are neural networks that can do interesting things, useful things, using only the principles of real brains, such as spike time independent plasticity. This very weird thing where if two spikes arrive at the same time, it can have like dramatically different effects relative to a spikes arriving at different times, including triggering plasticity and learning. We have this asynchronous local computation that happens so that the memory is kind of in the synapses, it's in the trained weights, and you don't need to shift back and forth between memory and computing.
Do those weights for the individual neurons today, for the artificial neurons, do they correspond to receptor densities in the synapses?
Yeah, they should. Yeah, that's the analogy, pretty much. Yeah. And another thing that happens with neuromorphic hardware, where you have individual computing units talking to each other, like in brains, is that you integrate a huge amount of information in a way that just doesn't really happen in a typical computer. So you have all neurons sort of able to talk to every other neuron. And when you get that kind of information integration, some people, including the people at Allen Brain Institute and many others, say that that's the kind of prerequisite for consciousness. Their theory is it's when you have high levels of information integration within a system in a way we typically only see in brains. That's when you get consciousness. And they have ways of studying this in sleep and anesthesia and pinging the brain with TMS in different states of awareness or lack of awareness to show that you can make information theoretic statements about the kind of the level of consciousness in the brain. I don't know if I buy it, but it's not a bullshit theory. It's actually integrated information. Giulio Tononi and Christoph Koch and a few other people have developed this, and it's a very interesting theory, and it's the first time we kind of have anything like a quantitative theory of consciousness.
The book I referenced in the Journal Club last year.
Yeah.
Also.
Oh yeah, excellent. I'm glad. just before we get too excited, even with neuromorphic hardware, including memristors, which is a special kind of synapse that I haven't talked about, we still, in our models, are not doing genomics. So, every single neuron in your brain has your full genome, and it's in use. It's massively in use during learning, during sleep, during all these different things that we do, including the things like our drives, our evolutionary drives, highly modulated at the genetic level. So if you remove that from a system, what happens? We don't really know. Similarly, dendritic trees. Most neurons, including the ones that we're going to use in these AI systems and the ones that we're using in our robots, are point neurons. So you have individual cell bodies that connect directly to a cell body of another neuron. Not how real neurons work. Real neurons have these massive complex trees where the location of synapses is highly regulated. So that often you have, at least in cortex, you can have positive excitatory connections further out, and then close to the cell body, you have inhibitory connections that can kind of block the input from further out in the dendrite. Who knows what it does? But it's clearly not a point neuron doing a point connection.
Not only that, but they can search. Their dendritic trees can search
Right.
for connections to other nodes that aren't necessarily forward or back. They can be arbitrary.
Yep. You have synaptogenesis and all kinds of stuff that we're not modeling here. Glial cells. So there's a lot left, and it creates this very interesting situation where we're going to have trouble distinguishing humans from robots eventually, I think. So this is just a little comparison between brains and AIs and how they're different. This is the Google Home, which is just one example of an AI system. When you talk to it, it's using a neural network to interpret what you're saying. And its search results are delivered by a neural network. So in brains, you have a huge amount of spontaneous activity in the neurons. They have different firing patterns. They respond different to different inputs. They have spontaneous activity that varies with the time of day and everything. Whereas in AIs, typically the neurons are going to be quiet unless you give them input. You don't want your self-driving car to start doing things on its own. You don't want your Google Home to start speaking at you without reason. But that's kind of something you could program into a system. But then you have these interconnected structures that I talked about. So you have the basal ganglia, you have the hippocampus, you have the thalamus, you have all these structures within the brain that clearly are enormously important, but that are not part of a traditional feed-forward system. They kind of take information within the brain and do further processing on it. And that's not something that generally happens in neural networks, partly because it's so hard to control. It's so hard to develop recurrent nets that do what you want them to do. And the way ours develops is just absurd. I mean, it's this gestation, development in a family. That the whole thing is how can we even begin to talk about modeling the developmental process of a real brain? That's not really. I don't even know where to begin. Brains are compatible, not brains, but brain models are compatible with neuromorphic hardware, like we said. So you can't take a typical object detection network and convert it into a spiking and run it on spiking hardware, but you can take a brain model and run it on spiking hardware, and that means you get access to these extra features like the time and energy and possibly consciousness benefits. And so we don't know exactly which parts of biology are necessary to have what we would call thoughts and feelings. We don't really know, and it's going to become very important to know because we will develop things like home assistant robots that we want to be as human-like as possible. So maybe we do give them a basal ganglia and a few other things to make them seem more human-like. And at some point, they start to ask for rights, or they start to want to not be mistreated, or something like that. And we then are faced with a weird situation where, if we mistreat the robot, maybe we did the simulation well enough that it's experiencing something like discomfort or pain or misery. That's possible. On the other hand, if we start to divert resources to take care of our robots, and they actually are not there, they're just simulations, they don't have any experience, then we've taken resources from actual humans who could need that And that also frames how we need, like, what we can do with these robots, minds and sex work, and it's unclear what the ethics around this is.
So the ethical goal would be to develop robots that we understand the model of consciousness and we know how to avoid putting it into our robots so that we don't give them.
That would be good. I think that would be good in many situations. There may be some situation where we do want consciousness in a robot, but
it can be important for certain tasks. But
yeah,
like sex work and mining, maybe not.
Yeah, and we don't have a good way of imagining how we could build a brain that works exactly like ours but isn't conscious. Like, can we just take that bit out, like philosophers dreamed? I don't know if that's possible. And certainly if the thing tells you it's conscious and its brain is behaving like our brains or something like it, but maybe it doesn't have a genome, like, we don't know. We don't know. We can't know, because I can't know that you're conscious, technically. Not really. And so we'll never really know, but I think as a culture, we're going to have to develop some sort of understanding of this. Anyway, but we're gonna right now we're gonna start from the top here in the AI hardware spectrum. Although we will be using a lot of cloud AI as well to train these models. And so the thing we're going to be using is. Okay. So I had this little thing set up to blink green when I said yes and red when I said no, and I'm going to reload that sketch in a bit, but it didn't load correctly now. But this is the Arduino Nano 33 BLE cents.
How many people online see you?
I don't know. They're not saying anything, so.
Yeah, they can see it.
Okay, good. So this is the Arduino Nano. There are other little modules like this that are able to also run AI systems. The ESP32 is pictured on the left here, and there's a few others. There's a handful of maybe 10 or 12 microcontrollers that still have enough memory and speed to run AI networks.
This is part of our TinyML.
Yeah. Not to train them, I will say. So we're going to use a commercial system called Edge Impulse to collect data and to train a model and then generate the code to deploy the model to the microcontroller. So the issue is the microcontroller is not powerful enough to train. It just would take way too long. So we need to collect the data, which we can use the microcontroller for. It has an accelerometer, it has a microphone, it has a few other things, and you can connect the camera. So we can use this to collect data, and then we train a model online in the cloud, check that it works, optimize it. We do everything like that in the cloud, including like the data pre-processing and all that. And then once it's done, we generate Arduino code that you just upload to this thing. And it's if you worked with Arduino before, you know that a sketch typically takes like 10 seconds to upload. This thing takes 10 minutes and frequently fails because it's such a big sketch. It's a massive like libraries and all kinds of things just to be able to run to distinguish yes and no, for instance. And that's what AI is. It's highly complicated. It's very advanced stuff, and they decided to squeeze it down to run on microcontrollers for reasons that I'm beginning to understand. There's a little acronym called BLURP that kind of summarizes what the point of running AI on microcontrollers is. So you have a bandwidth. You don't have to worry about bandwidth. So if you have a sending video, especially, is very demanding. You need to compress the video. You need to have a fast enough computer and large enough memory and a powerful enough Wi-Fi signaler to send video. And so there are many things that maybe you want to do locally because you don't have the bandwidth to ship the data to a cloud. So that's one benefit. Latency, everything happens right there. So again, there's no need to ship something to the cloud and ship it back. Economics, these things are cheaper than doing this on your phone. Reliability, you don't have to worry about Wi-Fi crashing. This has been the bane of my existence for the last 3 years, because with the robots, we went another direction. So we use We use similar modules that also cost between $20 and $40, but we ship all the data directly via Wi-Fi to a laptop, and then we do the processing on a laptop or on your phone, and then we ship the results back to the robot to do the control. And so that's kind of is two different ways of doing it, but you do rely on the Wi-Fi staying up, and that can be tricky in a crowded classroom with a lot of like iron in the walls and a lot of students with phones and so on. So that's another benefit. This one just runs. Privacy, you don't have to ship anything to the net, so you don't have to worry about the data being taken. So this was a good summary. So the TinyML allows you to run a model, an AI, without an internet connection, with minimum latency, and with minimum power consumption. That's kind of the aim. And so with these, we can imagine having little product like glasses or something on your clothes or something attached to an EEG helmet that will just work. It'll just run. It'll do its inference continuously, and it'll just run. If you want to, but for the training and for basically if you want to do video processing, you need to step up at least to the Jetson Nano or to a computer. So yeah, so let's see, what time is it? 11. So what I'm hoping we will do is I'm going to share with you this Google Doc where I have the instructions, like I was just taking notes while I was getting this to work on my side, and I'm just hoping we can follow those instructions and get a little system up and running right now. Where's the chat? Oh, here. So this is the TinyML instructions. Oh, you need access, hang on. So share, change. Okay, so try it now. Anyone with the link should have access. And so there's two ways to go here. So we can do the complicated way, or we can try to do it the easy way. Let's see. Does everyone have Chrome? Yes? Everyone's got Chrome? Excellent, okay. So in that case, we're going to start by using what they call the web USB interface. So you actually let your browser connect directly to your microcontroller. So the only thing we're going to need to do then is to load the firmware, the Edge Impulse firmware, onto the microcontroller. And then we should be able to start to collect data right away in the browser. So don't follow these instructions. Install Edge Impulse firmware. So does everyone have one of these? The little nanos? And does everyone have a micro USB cable?
I don't know the micro. Oh wait, is it black cable?
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you're following along online and you don't have one of these, that's okay. You can use your computer to capture voice and video, and so you can just skip this step. All right. So I'm gonna share my screen. Am I still sharing my screen? No.
You said don't plug it into the USB, correct?
Yeah, you can plug it in.
Oh,
So let me show you what I'm doing here. Uh-oh, Stanislav has a huge frown on his face. Am I talking shit?
No, everything okay.
Okay, just checking. All right, so I'm sharing my screen here. So we are going to do just these steps. So step 1 and 2 here, not step 3. So if you look, I'll share the link here. So this is the link to the instructions in Edge Impulse. So again, Edge Impulse is an online system that allows you to collect data from a variety of sensors, including your phone, including the Nano, pre-process the data to kind of extract words and so on, train a model using an online system and using their GPUs, and then export Arduino code or whatever code you need to run on your device. So it's a very helpful system that way. I have a feeling that in a couple of weeks, when you know what data you want to collect, you'll end up writing a custom system, or will help you write a custom code package to collect the kind of data that you want. But to get started, Edge Impulse is really good. So I am here. I'm gonna connect my development board, double click on the little reset button to make the yellow LED flash, meaning the system is in a bootloader mode. And then I'm going to download the latest Edge Impulse firmware, which I have here. Unzip. Move the unzipped files to a new folder, and then I'm gonna run Flash Windows. And then I'm gonna ignore Windows warning. Okay, you do need the Arduino CLI. Okay. So we have to do one more thing here. I'm doing this backwards now, but so we need the Arduino command line interface to do this. So I'm gonna post that in the chat as well. And part of the task here will be to write down the steps and just write down the problems and the solutions that we kind of develop along the way. So we need, I'm going to take those notes here actually. We need. Arduino CLI. Okay, I'm clicking on installation and downloading the Windows package. This command line interface is just a single file, it's just a single executable, and you just need to put that in the same folder as the Edge Impulse firmware that we got on the previous site.
Where's the code?
If you look in the chat, I shared 2 links.
Once you have anything,
Sure.
this. But I can.
Yeah.
Oh, even now.
I'm embarrassed about it.
No, it's okay.
No way to share this.
It's in those. I just.
What?
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I've downloaded the Arduino CLI for Windows. I've downloaded the firmware for the Nano. Now I'm flashing the Nano, just meaning I'm uploading the Arduino code to the Nano, and I'm very curious to see if this is gonna work. So normally I would have done this the harder way, which is what the instructions here were talking you through. So installing Python, installing Node.js, installing the Edge Impulse CLI.
Do you have to run that command, the third one, in the same directory that you had?
Which one? This one? This command?
Yeah. Is there a specific directory that needs to be in?
So we're not.
Just the Arduino needs to be in the same as the Edge Impulse.
Yeah, the Arduino needs to be the same. Yeah. So we're going to see if we can skip these steps for now, because only yesterday did I find this web, or figure out how to use the web USB functionality in Edge Impulse. So while this is flashing, I am actually going to go to Edge Impulse,
Yeah.
where you will probably need to sign up to be able to use it. So just edgeimpulse.com. I'm already signed up, so I'm going to log in. And that takes me to this start screen. So everything is organized around projects. I've got 5 projects. I'm just going to pick one here, test project. No, I'm going to create a new project. Let's see. TinyML. So it creates a new project. And then takes you here. Asks what kind of data you want to be processing in this project. And so the things that it suggests is accelerometer data, audio data, and image data. There's possibilities to use other sensors. So part of,
Can we first wait for everybody to install?
Yeah.
So they can concentrate on the.
Yeah.
Let's help
Good
everybody.
point. So, yeah, let's wait with Edge Impulse. This is still running.
You said actually you don't really go to the website, so yeah, Edge Impulse is sign up.
So you need to download the Arduino CLI. You need to download the Edge Impulse firmware. You need to put those in the same folder, and then run the Windows Flash or Mac Flash or Linux Flash, depending on your
Can
system.
you say that one more time? You said
Yeah.
I know you said the Arduino CLI, but I didn't know the other one.
What is the Arduino CLI?
So command line interface. So it's yeah. So there is the Arduino CLI, which is the last link in the chat. If you click on that link and then go to install, there's a executable for all the systems, all the platforms, and then you also need the firmware, which is which is in the first thing I shared. Oh yeah, so the 2 last links in the chat, the docs.edgeimpulse link and the arduino.github link, they have the 2 things you need to download: the Edge Impulse firmware and the Arduino CLI. Okay, so my Arduino finished flashing. I'm gonna just.
Some trouble finding the place to download the Arduino. So like I went to the link.
Oh yeah. So so in the Arduino link, go to installation.
Where it says installing dependencies Arduino CLI.
There should be a link that says go to
So
the installation.
Oh, okay.
yeah, go to the installation page and then scroll down to download, and you just need the where it says latest packages.
Yeah.
Just get the one you need.
So that was the Arduino one. We also need the engine pulse one.
Yes.
And
Okay. Take a little break from sharing here.
Sorry, Chris, could you repeat how to install Edge Impulse firmware? I've been taken to a installation page with multiple links.
Okay. So
I just sent a link on the chat. Arduino
Oh, good.
a link with the zip file. Once you extract the zip file, you will have a
yes. So
you will have a file for each executable file for each platform. If you are on a Windows, just run flash windows.bat. You can right click and select run as admin.
So type in arduino.github.io. Just Google Arduino installation.
Anybody has any other issues?
Oh.
Harminder?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you can just walk me through from the Arduino, which one am I installing?
Yes. So if you go to the arduino.github.io,
Yes.
you see the link in the chat there?
Yes.
Okay, so if you go to that one,
I'm just gonna send you this.
it says installation. There's an
Yes.
installation link. Click that,
Yeah, I got that.
and then scroll down to download and latest packages.
Okay.
And so
I'm
I
there.
download the one that says Windows 64-bit.
Windows 60. That was my
That's the-
question. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
sure.
you. Okay.
So that's the Arduino CLI, and then in addition, you need the firmware if you're going to be using the Nano.
Okay. So that's the one with Stanislav set. I hope I got the name correct.
No, I sent actual
No, he sent the firmware.
actual firmware.
Yeah.
So there is a CLI with which you can upload firmware, and there is a firmware. Those are two different things. So Chris
Okay.
just explained you how to install a CLI, and after that you can follow link that I pasted, Arduino firmware, and download the firmware. Once you download,
Okay, I got that. Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
We'll come back for others. Could you get through?
Sorry, I still have a question with this one, the Edge Impulse. So which one am I downloading from here? When I'm
So you are downloading the one in the docs.edgeimpulse.com link. You scroll down to where it says update the firmware, and then there's a link that says download the latest Edge Impulse firmware.
Okay, let me find it. Give me a second. No, wait a second.
Because there were there's a couple different things you search for. So like for me, edit the system.
I can show my screen again.
There will be some.
Okay, if you can guide me through, please.
Absolutely. So this is the site. So
Yes. Okay.
and then scroll down to this one, update the firmware, and just click on this, and it should download a zip file. And then just unzip that to the same folder as the Arduino CLI.
Okay, just let me find it now. So I'm here. Okay.
What should we name the pathway for the matter?
No.
What is the question? So if you search.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, okay. Probably the only one that's not embarrassed about what I'm doing there.
This? No, that's external, but I think you can't add another.
Hey Siri, how do you how do you install Arduino?
So it does not matter what we name the path. So like we have to have the
No, but wait. So why are you messing around with that?
just because here after this is said add path for the Arduino. So
sometimes it doesn't.
do I need to just extract this and over the set of paths?
So I never did it because I put the Arduino CLI in the kind of main working folder, and then you don't have to.
So and the main working folder is where we have the edge.
Yeah.
So that would just really extract to that folder.
Yeah.
So don't do that. Give me one.
Well, so you shouldn't. I mean, we'll probably get around to doing it at some point, but right now I'm not expecting you to do all the things that were in those instructions. Maybe I shouldn't even have shared them. But just those two things, to download the Arduino CLI and the Edge Impulse firmware. That's all you need right now. Just put that in a folder, and then you should be able to flash your Arduino. So those instructions are also on this page, where it just tells you to double click on the Arduino and then flash it.
I have a stupid question. I'm confused on where I would find the installation for Edge Impulse.
So that's in the docs.edgeimpulse.com. So if you go to the chat of the Google Meet, it's.
I'm saying on my own computer. So like the installation, would it have a specific location to it, or would it be based on where I? Would it be based on where I?
Yeah. It's a zip file. Depends where you're on zip.
This said, we have this Arduino CLI.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Sorry, I shouldn't have shared those instructions. We'll get to that eventually. Edge Impulse has a lot of different features, and they have a data forwarder and a application manager and a bunch of different stuff. And to use that, you need to install Python and Node.js and so on. But they realized at some point that people were having too much trouble installing all this stuff, and they figured out a way to access the Nano directly from the browser instead. And to do that, you only need to upload the correct firmware to the Nano, and you're ready to go. And that's what we're doing right now. And to upload the correct firmware, you need the firmware itself, and you need this thing called Arduino CLI. So it should just be 2 files that you can download. The links have already been posted in the chat. That's the 2 zip files that Stanislav posted in the chat. If you're using Windows, or did you just post one? Oh yeah, he just posted one. Oh yeah. And then within the zip file for the firmware.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Inside is for all 3 systems. Yeah, Linux, Mac, and Windows.
But I can post a link to the firmware installation as well. So. Right, so Stanislav posted the Arduino firmware link, and I will post the Arduino link. Oh yeah. So it depends if you're using Windows or Mac. But if you're using Windows, it would be this one.
I should see a folder once I install Edge Impulse script in that directory.
Oh, the flash drive. Oh, yeah.
The Edge Impulse firmware is 4 files. So you unzip them to some location anywhere in your computer. And then
I did the npm install.
Okay. I don't know about. I don't know where that installs.
Should I do a separate one?
Yeah, you can do that. Just create a new folder, download the firmware and the Arduino CLI.
Can you add it to the chat?
Mm-hmm.
Can you add it to the chat?
Yeah. So in the chat we have the last thing shared is the Arduino CLI. Oh, but you're using a Mac. So I posted the Arduino CLI for Windows in the chat, and I'm adding the Mac OS. Okay, so
So I got the Arduino firmware in this TinyML folder that I made. So then I just need the Edge Impulse software.
no, that was the Edge Impulse stuff. Now
this is it?
Yeah, now you need the Arduino CLI.
Okay. And that link is also in the chat.
Yeah, so the last 2 links in the chat right now are the Windows and Mac Arduino CLI zip files. So just unzip one of those, put it in the same folder as the Edge Impulse firmware, and then flash the firmware. Let me know when you do.
I think I got it done. And how do I test it?
So you need to double click on that one so that the yellow light is pulsing. And then you should just be able to double click on the flash windows if you're using a Windows machine. And then that's going to open up a command window. It's going to take like 5 minutes.
Yeah, it gets toasted down here.
Yeah.
I was sweating through my clothes yesterday.
It's better now. I walk here and then I run up and down the stairs.
I'm on the battery trying to pay or something.
Yeah.
I'm glad I brought that thing today.
Yeah.
Is this thing working?
So we have to do this. Yeah.
It's on. It's just weak.
We figured it out. Oh my
Go
gosh.
to there, you go to security and privacy. It's okay. You go to security.
There we go. If you want, you can put that over there. We're playing it.
I'm taking stuff down. My poor computer. Oh my
If
goodness.
it does process included on your end. So,
Process included.
open up.
Do the same thing for,
Everybody else feel like-
Somewhere that called I'm gonna send you two.
No, I don't.
And then after this, I should be able to open it.
Okay, alright.
Okay.
Zero access to Feel like. Well, you need it.
Listen, you two, and basically this one, you might like the one that I see for this, but the folder will move, but it's just notes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I did
You
that,
download
and
them,
then
then you go
I
to
don't know where
them
it is on
in your
your
folders, and then you can extract them,
look it
the
up.
location you
And
extract
extract
to
it,
is that
that's all I'm
folder.
gonna do with this string. Yeah,
Maybe,
and that's it. That's all. So it should pull up like your Arduino Nano 33 BLE stuff. Yes. I just screwed that.
I don't think you're actually gonna need no just
I
now.
think it's just,
It can be done that way, there's a simple way that we want to do it.
let's not.
There's two links, two downloads.
Two things.
Did you try and run your thing? Oh. Yeah, so once you plug it in, see if the yellow light flashing.
Oh, that.
Yeah, is the yellow button. Give it two taps and a white button.
And hold it steady, or like to do the like the opposite.
And then we go to the folder that has those downloads in it. And then you'll basically double click the process flash windows.
Alright. That's like. Yeah, I mean, it just reloaded everything.
You should open a little window that's gonna
Yeah, the
start.
saving section.
Actually, that would be a good question. Because mine's like going through like a process that's taking like 5 minutes.
One flash and the other, you can get back to privacy.
Then you're able to check it. And then you're going to go to the folder that has those files that you have. Sure.
Actually, I think it's in my PC, so I don't need to.
Oh, yeah, flash one. Yeah.
It has a
Oh, this is the flash thing.
What is it supposed to
No, the flash thing. I think so.
Yeah, and that's mine looks like it's.
Oh, well, actually, you might see it.
It's really say. Hey, here's some process complete. It's.
I download everything you told me to download.
Mine
Put it in folder.
Yeah, mine's- No, mine's flashing, but it's like different. It's awesome. Or the-
I don't know.
But it's still blinking, so I don't know if it's
Yeah, you have to.
Oh, you have to USB, not USB. Oh, wait, a lot. We have to wiggle it down. Oh. Yeah, just press it. Oh, yeah, just don't break it. question over there.
But you should be able to do it with only those 2 files that are sitting.
Yeah, left and right. Remember for things with other textures and all that. If solder was really heavy, it wouldn't hurt. Yeah. So I think mine is better actually. Yeah, I think yours is better. Mine is Okay, so you have the same problem. You did that. Still downloading?
No, I already downloaded. I'm running that Flash Windows thing.
So I did it in the command line, like when I go where it's my computer. I feel like it will work. Because I think I finished my. I did it. I think. So how do I check? Oh, I didn't know.
I just don't know how to test it. Like I'm kind of confused. Someone pull it. So just I'm pretty much only going to pull it exactly on your download.
That's okay. I'm just gonna wait and if it's wrong, I'll just clean it right now. But that's just the
So as soon as we're ready to try it, we can just try it.
ready to try.
Yeah?
Let's see. Let's do something.
Okay, let's do something. Good. Excellent. So,
Yeah.
and we can come back and fix this for people if it didn't work.
My head just.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I ran that Flash Windows command, and now it's done. It's saying Flash Arduino to set up your development environment with Edge Impulse, run Edge Impulse daemon, or to run your impulse on your development board, run Edge Impulse, run impulse.
Yes.
Which one should I do?
So we're not going to do either of those right now, I think. So just click enter and it's going to close.
Yeah.
And then can you pull up Edge Impulse? So edgeimpulse.com. Yeah, in Chrome.
Yeah.
And you need to log in and create a project. All right. So then what you should be able to do if you manage to flash the Arduino with the right firmware, if you click on data acquisition, you here have the option to connect using web USB.
Yeah.
So if you click on that, your Arduino should now show up on a COM port.
Nano 33
That's the one. And then you click connect. And boom, you're actually ready to collect data. And so what I might do is to label this as shakes. And then I'm gonna start sampling. Now it's sampling. I'm gonna kind of shake my Arduino back and forth to get a few shake examples. And then it'll be visible right there. There we go. So those are the little shakes. That's the data from the accelerometer that I kind of shook 3 times. And you can do it again, just wait for it to start. Now I'm going to do kind of more O-like things.
Yeah, got it.
All right. And so here we have a very different. Yeah, you got it?
Yeah, I got it.
Excellent. You can also use the microphone. Beep. Hello.
The simplest way I saw it was make folder and then do the 2 download the same drive.
Yeah.
That's the.
Okay, so when I redo this.
Do you want? I can forward you the 2 links.
Sure. Are they different from these?
I'm not sure, but it's just I know they work.
They work, yeah.
And other device.
Okay. So I think we have some success. If you don't have Arduino, or you didn't get it to work. Let me show you quickly one other thing that you can do. So if I create a new project, where do I create a new project? Oh. All right. So let me do one other thing. So I'm going to do an example where I don't use the Arduino Nano. So I'm going to create a new project. Let's call it video 1. Create a new project. And so this time I'm going to close this wizard. This time I'm going to go to devices, connect the new device, and then use my computer. And so if I do that, it's going to open up this new tab, and I'm going to say that I want to collect images. And then it's going to tell me that I need to get permission to access the camera, allow, and now I'm there. So label, I'm going to call this Chris. And then I'm going to take a couple of pictures. Just get a few different. Yeah, and those are all labeled Chris. And then I'm going to do another one called hand, where I capture a bunch of pictures of my hand. Okay.
This was under data acquisition again, correct?
It's under devices. So go to devices, and then, all right. And so once you've done that, if you just go back to the Edge Impulse page and go to data acquisition, now you'll find all of those labeled data sets right here. So there's all the Chris data sets. Whoop, hello. Oh, there's the Chris data sets and the hand data sets. So let me just click on Chris, and you can actually see the pictures. And so now we're actually going to train something. So the first thing I need to do is to go to Impulse Design.
When I want to add the device and I set to my computer, it only let me choose a microphone. I mean, my computer does have a camera, but I didn't know if that was something that
Is it being used for something else? Is it on the chat?
Yeah,
maybe?
Sure. So if I...
Although mine is also used for the chat. I don't know how it did that. But anyway, so I have the image data, and then I click on processing block. So this is the first step where you pre-process the data. This is like the retina extracting important features from the visual scene and kind of presenting them to the brain. So I'm just gonna add the image pre-processing, and then the learning block is the actual neural network. So I'm gonna click here, and I'm gonna use transfer learning on this one. There's keras and regression as well, but we use transfer learning here. And the output features it already knows. It has Chris and hand.
So you have image data.
Image data, pre-processing, neural network, and then the outputs. And then I'm going to click Save Impulse. They call impulse, they call the model or the network or the AI, including the pre-processing, an impulse. It's just a name for the pre-processing and the network. All right, so now I have a saved impulse. I'm going to go here to parameters and click Save Parameters and generate features. So this is the pre-processing step. It's gonna generate now the pre-processing, the filters, the sensory filters that it's going to use to actually process the data in the neural network. And so all this is happening now on the server end. This is happening on the Edge Impulse servers. If you use this too much, they're going to start asking for money. But the advantage is that you don't have to do the actual TensorFlow coding yourself. All right, so okay, so we've generated features. Job complete. Next, I click on transfer learning. So basically, you just have to work your way down this tool chain here. Now I'm in transfer learning. I'm going to just.
I think all of us have had no success getting our cameras connected. Is that correct?
Not for the cameras, just the camera.
Just the camera? Oh, okay. On Edge Impulse, you've got the camera.
And did it ask you for permission to access the camera at one point?
Mine didn't.
It didn't. Okay.
No, I don't know how I would change that setting.
Huh. Okay, let's come back to that. I'll just finish this to show you. So now I'm actually training the network. Because I only had about 10 pictures, this should not take that long. But if you use, so this is part of the problem, is that the more data you have, the better the model. And that goes to like thousands and thousands of data sets. You're going to keep seeing improvement in the learning, the more pictures you need. When I was training our robots to detect other robots, and I did 100 pictures and I wasn't having any luck and I was getting frustrated, and then I got 150 pictures more, worked perfectly. Sometimes it just needs to get over a threshold to kind of get enough of a hold on the data to know all the important things.
It'd be painful though. You're like, how much data do I need?
Yeah.
You know?
Oh yeah. How much data and how long should I keep on training? Usually they give you this loss function where you can see how much you're gaining by training more, but sometimes it's not that straightforward.
Good. If I plug these two things together, can I use this camera?
You can. I don't know how to use it yet. I haven't tried that.
Because it seemed to offer an option for, so when I go to connect a new device,
Yeah.
one of the options is data from any device with the data forwarder. Was I supposed to select use your computer, or was I supposed to?
If you select use your computer, you should be able to access the camera. I don't know why not. But otherwise, okay, well, let me just finish this. Okay. Retrain model. So now that I've set up the pre-processing and the transfer learning, the neural network itself, I hit train the model. This is the actual backprop step where it's adjusting all the weights in the network to be able to optimally distinguish between my face and my hand.
What do you want to be identified by a camera? Or you take pictures of you? Still make it a little bit.
You also include one of your children.
I don't know what else to do.
Do the smile one, not the smile. Nice.
Oh, yeah, I want to cover my face. Yeah. Maybe they'll live here. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's. Yeah.
Well, how does it be? Because I should have labeled, I should have had the label on there. Yeah.
So I think the feedback issue is specifically just about how you just layer.
That's the good bias. This one.
Okay, so having now trained the model, I can go back to data, to devices and collect data. That's going to open up this again. I'm again going to have to give it access to the camera for some reason. And then there's the classification mode here, where if I click on that, building project. Again, access to the camera. All right. So classify. Yes. Okay. So if I can just make this window a little smaller, you should be able to see this network actually doing its job. So, come on. Here we go. So now it has the camera of the computer, and then the image gets sent to the model that I just trained, and then it will give me a prediction as to whether what it's seeing is Chris or hand. So Chris, 94% probability, 88, 99, 100, 99. Put the hand there, switch. Now the hand is up, being highest. See, it's pretty stable. If I mess with it, yeah, exactly. I mess with it, it seems to prefer my. Yeah, there's pretty well. Yeah, there we go. Okay, even split between me and the hand. So that's a working AI model that can do something. The final step, if this was a model that was trained on something like microphone data or accelerometer data, would be to generate the code that you would then upload on the Arduino. And then the Arduino, you could just disconnect that and connect it to a battery or whatever, and it would still run the same predictor. When it comes to images, it is possible to get the camera to work with that thing, but it's your video is particularly challenging. It's such a large data format relative to any other kind of one-dimensional data that we typically look at. So one thing that we are having to do now with the robots is that we want to switch to a cheaper module. We want to use the ESP32, but it can only send like 100 by 100 pixels to yeah. So it's not good in the sense of allowing students to see what the robot is seeing, which is something we had before. However, it is good enough for AI, so we can still do object detection and all that in using just 100 by 100 pixels. It just won't be as pretty. But here, for instance, this image is much higher quality than the network was trained on. It was trained on a 96 by 96 image, and usually there's some compression because the larger the image, the longer the network takes to train. Okay, so where did we end up with the?
I got my phone to be the device for taking photos, but I wasn't able to change the label, so it wasn't able to define things. I don't know how I would go about that.
Okay. And the Nano itself, were you able to connect to it using the web USB?
Yeah.
No?
Okay.
I was.
You were?
Yeah, the Macs were the problem.
Oh, right. So, but you are using Chrome?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Are you getting the fails? No, it's just not recognizing.
This is what Stanislav warned me about yesterday, using the cheap the cheap web USB function, and he was but it won't work for everyone.
I was able to get that.
Oh yeah, okay, good. And you are using
Windows.
Oh, Windows. Okay.
Yeah, I think it would be.
Oh, okay. Okay. But it could be that there was something wrong with the installation. So you. Oh yeah. So you got the Arduino CLI and you got the Flash the firmware, and it ran in the sense that when you click the Mac, what's it called?
Yeah.
The BAT. Flash Mac. You got a. Okay, you got a process computer. And then and then the thing is still not. So what actually happens in the web interface when you click the? What's that thing called? Yes. So when you go to devices and click connect new device, you just don't see it. You don't see it? Okay. I'm actually not seeing it right now. No. Oh, wait. No. Sorry. Not connect new device. So sorry. Go to data acquisition. Click connect using web USB. Is it there?
There it is.
Okay. Good. Aha.
Wait. Okay, so now it says fail to connect. Oh, no.
Disappeared?
No, just says fail to connect.
Try again. Just okay that.
From this.
I'm playing from this thing just in case there's.
Maybe it's been because it's already paired. At least that's happened to me now. Because I was use it, but
did something
Maybe
change on the
restart.
screen when you paired it?
I mean, it did originally, yeah. I think it. How do I get it done so it's true?
So if the web interface doesn't work, then we just go ahead and use the full instructions that are in that document. So you don't have to download a few different things, but that way works for sure.
Okay.
This is a new beta thing that I wasn't sure if it was going to work. It looks like it only works on Windows. Although I'd be surprised actually.
I got it connected to this, but I'm curious to know how I connect to the camera.
Yeah. So there's excellent instructions on the. Let's see.
Chris, can you unmute?
Sorry, there we go. So we were just talking about how getting data from the Spiker box into Edge Impulse is going to be kind of a big challenge that I hope we can do together and get proper instructions from.
Yeah.
I don't know if we ultimately will use Edge Impulse for that, but for now, because it allows us to do the training as well, I think we'll try to stick with Edge Impulse as long as we can.
Yeah, I started creating Python script that will enable us to just convert the output file of spike recorder wave file to the format that Edge Impulse understands, and we'll just import it. I think it will be easier than this. Much easier.
Right, good.
We'll just import file.
Yeah. Okay. So if I understand the schedule today, the afternoon is sort of full.
2 o'clock, we're in this morning at 3 o'clock. We have the.
Oh, okay.
So we're going to do the general public Sam at 1.
Okay.
If we have time, we'll work on it.
Okay, good.
3.
All right.
Or the general public is over.
And then we kind of finish after the talk. Yeah.
I think that my presentation will be pretty straightforward, so I think we'll get through it in a reasonable amount.
Okay.
What steps do I have to take then to not just access the accelerometer and the microphone, but then to also access?
Yeah. So I was just looking at.
Because I got that this device to show up on it in course.
So if I search for, what was it, adding site. So image classification. So if I share with you in the chat this link, so these tutorials that they give you are actually really good, and they typically work. But what you'll see here with this one, at least, so this is how to add images to the processing stream. But the problem here is that they say you need one of these supported devices, and the only Arduino device that they talk about is the Portenta H7 with a vision shield, which is about twice the price of the Arduino that we're using, or 3 times even, I think. So I'm not sure if that one can do this particular tutorial. However, they gave us a camera and a board, so clearly it can do something. There's another tutorial called Object Recognition here, but that one too, it doesn't list the Nano as a supported device. Motion recognition.
I don't think it would. We'll never try, but
Oh, here we go. Okay, so if you go to this one, this tutorial, this is called continuous motion recognition. And for that one, our board is listed. So if you follow the steps here, you should be able to do a motion detection. But no, but that's not camera either.
So I tried doing the live streaming with the camera, and it's quite hard through the Arduino software because the update rate is difficult.
Yeah.
If you take single pictures, you are just getting all the RGB values that you can then insert in a collab, and then you get a quite pixelated picture. I think maybe 420 times 300 something. Not sure for how much stuff we can actually use the images that are taken by the camera on the TinyML board.
Yeah, I agree. When we were discussing this in the context of the robots, it really did feel like the one thing you cannot really do well on these systems is image processing. But they do give us this camera. With the Nano, they do give us this development board and a little camera, so there must be something you can do with it.
Yeah, I think if it's static, but if you install it in a like statically at one position, taking every time the same image, it's possible to use the information. But as I said, when I started streaming a video, it was really nearly impossible to like get information out of it.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Well, let's take a break for now and come back at 1 for the journal cloud. Is that right? Yeah. All right. Very good. Thank you, everyone online.
Thanks a lot.
We'll see you in an hour.
Very interesting. See you.
All right. Bye.